Transitions and outlines. This lecture is going to be a bit tough to make interesting. I did my best to keep it lively, but, well, it is about transitions and outlining. I'm going to show you how to link ideas from one paragraph to the next. And as you write, you need to keep your outline firmly in mind. You tie each paragraph back to the last one, and your topic sentence and your closing sentence in each paragraph should form the rungs of a ladder. If the reader only read those two sentences, he or she should know what your paper is about and what direction the paper is moving. I'm going to demonstrate these skills using two different thesis statements, one about culture and one about food, but both related to Thanksgiving. About a quarter of each of these papers is actually just made up, with some actual research thrown in for fun. So the first thesis: Thanksgiving has a long history of which Americans only know a small part. This brief history will show how Thanksgiving has moved from a public and religious event in Europe, acknowledging the providence of God, to a private meditation on the status of the family in America. Thesis 2: Thanksgiving captures the shifting tastes and cultures of Europe and America. This brief history will acquaint the reader with the food culture of Thanksgiving. Right, so those are our two thesis statements. And in both cases, I'm not really arguing any would or should. I'm just arguing for new understandings of Thanksgiving. So starting with the first thesis, you can see where we are going by looking at the outline on the left. You can see introduction and thesis, religious significance in Europe, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado and American Firsts, Squanto being declared a national holiday, Norman Rockwell, movies, and the conclusion. So were I to really write this paper, I might start with the horloge, which is the oldest working clock in Europe. It has a dial that shows all of the church holidays, which I think gives a good indication of feast and fast days. And so I might start with how old are Thanksgiving feasts and what are their European roots. Then I'd give those details. And then my ending sentence for that paragraph would be, so as is evident from the liturgical Christian calendar, which is related to that dial on the clock, Europeans were very accustomed to seasonal feast and fast, and the notion of stopping to hold a feast was both a natural impulse of gratitude and a shared cultural element that Europeans brought to the New World. And that gets us to our paragraph from the previous lecture. This is the one that we fully developed, and it is adapted from Wikipedia. And I won't read all of that to you because you've seen that before. But you can see that from the beginning and the end, we have the Europeans linked to the paragraph before, and we're having established quite early in the New World. So we're going to expect to hear something about the New World in the next paragraph, which we do. We have the story of Squanto, or Tisquantum, which is actually a strange and sad story. He was captured by the English early on, when the English first showed up to the New World, and then he was sold to the Spanish, who did not believe in enslaving their subjects. So he was released back to some English monks, and then he was transported back to the New World. And when he got there, he found that his entire home village had died while he was gone from the diseases brought by the Europeans. And so he was one of two people on the entire East Coast capable of speaking English. And he was sent by his adopted chief to the newly arrived pilgrims, and they survived because of his help. So he is really central to the narrative of providence at work for the pilgrims in the New World. And he became part of school lessons. You probably learned about him. And so I've got that linked from the New World and an extraordinary Native American. And then we end that paragraph with national holiday declared so by President Lincoln. There were others who declared it a national holiday, but I wanted to pick up Lincoln for a particular reason. It carries us forward. So Lincoln carries us forward, and we have him asking people to set aside a day for Thanksgiving and also a day for repentance, because this is the middle of the Civil War, and people are dying, and there's a tremendous, as he calls it, lamentable civil strife. And he says we should fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it. So Lincoln declares a national day of thanksgiving and repentance and prayer during the American Civil War. And I will add that this is the beautiful language that mirrors his most beautiful second inaugural address. So here we have the war as a link between Lincoln, the Civil War, and the next paragraph. Which gets us to Norman Rockwell. And so we can say, and it was wartime that framed the most memorable image of Thanksgiving. And this is a pretty memorable image. It is the national mood of 1943, which is both sober and kind of hopeful. This is one of the four freedoms. And the four freedoms, this one is called freedom from want. And want here means a lack of something. So in other words, this is a freedom from want, meaning the freedom that comes from having enough. And it is a kind of a playful image, and it has almost a selfie perspective. You can see that guy in the corner, the lower right-hand corner. And most Americans kind of react to it today with either affection or a kind of exasperation. Thanksgiving is still a kind of meditation on providence, but it's really becoming more, in this particular image, an image of a closed family circle. And as we carry on, we can see that happening more and more in American sort of thoughts about Thanksgiving. And I'm not so familiar with these recent films, but they're a good cultural touchstone for how people are thinking about or feeling about a holiday. So I included two of them here. One is Home for the Holidays, and the other is The Fantastic Mr. Fox. And I think they both really hone in on what we mean by family, or why family is important. And that brings us to our conclusion. You can kind of see how the whole paper hangs together with the words that link ideas together from paragraph to paragraph. And I conclude that Thanksgiving has moved from a public and religious event in Europe, acknowledging the providence of God, to a private meditation on the status of the family in America. And I think you could add that Americans are no longer sure about providence or even about family, but both are the object of sober hope. So that's how I would end that paper. So here's another version of this paper, but this time there's an emphasis on food. And you can see that I was really able to use some of the previous structure, but I modified it as I went along to argue something slightly different. And you can see the outline looks a little different on the left there. So I'm going to bring in the cod industry, which is how Europeans handled the fasting that was required by the church. So instead of having these feasts being very common, I have the cod industry was a shared trade and a taste that Europeans carried to the New World. And indeed, they went there to do some fishing as well as other things. And then I can take that same paragraph, but I can add a number of details about the New World foods, which include corn, potatoes, tomatoes, turkey, cranberries, pumpkins, a lot of what is on the menu. And I stuck a few of those things in there. I don't even know if that's true, but certainly they would have encountered corn, and they would have encountered fish, and they probably would have encountered turkey. So I included those three in my paragraph this time around. And then, of course, I can go back to Squanto, but this time I can talk about how the Native Americans grew corn and beans, and that's also in the same primary source document where he talks about William Bradford talks about that, showing them how to plant corn and where to take fish. And I can use Lincoln again, but this time I can focus that paragraph on Civil War Thanksgiving foods that were sent by families to the soldiers who were fighting in the Civil War. And I've got some primary sources on that I found online. And I put the link there just in case you're interested. And I can take that same picture from Norman Rockwell, but I can talk about what's on the table rather than the national mood. And I can talk about the roast turkey being the center of that image, which it is. And a little bit about how Americans know what should be on the menu, but are changing it for the current tastes and diets. Now I need to do a little research on the top 10 lists for Thanksgiving menus. I didn't do that, but that would be my content for this, the penultimate paragraph. And I would talk about the turkey again, connecting the last paragraph to this one. And I would say it's prepared in new ways. I would say there's a changing list of newly popular foods. I might look at maybe a decade's worth of top 10s. And then I would probably add the latest in the top 10 of preferred Thanksgiving food is mac and cheese. And then we are home and dry with the food conclusion. Rather than having something about culture, I would say this Brief history has shown how Thanksgiving includes older European use of seafood, but adds turkey, corn, potatoes, and the fruits and vegetables of the New World, including pumpkins and cranberries. The latest foodways include more casual dishes like mac and cheese. And then I might say foodways are a wonderful way to reveal cultural ideas and preferences as they change over time. So just to remind you again, as you're writing, keep your outline firmly in mind. Tie each paragraph back to the last one. Your topic sentence and your closing sentence in each paragraph should form the rungs of a ladder. If the reader only knew those two sentences, he or she should know what your paper is about and what direction the paper is moving. And do expect to revise your outline as you're going. You probably will have to revise your main idea and the connections between paragraphs more than once, so expect to make those kinds of revisions as you're writing.